for us. So I'm hoping that the conservation will work with the council, that you're going to follow the legal procedures to work in that swamp. All right, that's just one item. If I go to the next page, 5 of 13, Appendix C, when you start looking at some of the utilities and services, whether it be cleaning at Kendall Dean, electric at Town Hall, Kendall Dean Utilities, Hallowell Utilities, I guess, did we pay attention as to how we're going to use these buildings when we set the rates for utility requirements? So maybe as you go through the line items, maybe you can look to see, does it make sense to have $20,000 for Kendall Dean for janitorial, unless the building's going to be available soon, if it's going to take another year for the building. So whatever requirement is for the janitorial at Kendall Dean. And then you look at the electric for Town Hall. Are we going to use Town Hall once Kendall Dean is finished? And the Hallowell utilities, I know now the town is responsible. The school department has walked away from it. So now we have to pay the utilities. But are we going to utilize Hallowell? Which we should. There's a budget of $37,000 for Hallowell utilities. So I'm hoping you're going to use the building to get your money's worth for $37,000. If I go to Appendix C, page 6 of 13, dispatch salary at the bottom. I guess we're adding more dispatchers to the police department. I made the assumption, I don't know if it's true, that as we added dispatchers, we would need less overtime on the police department. So I don't know if there's a balance or we're out of balance. We still have a high overtime budget on the police department on page 7 of 13. Which is a very high overtime budget for the police department, even though we're adding a big budget for dispatch. So I'm trying to understand the relationship between dispatch and police overtime.
There is no relationship between the two. The dispatches were put in place when the previous council went forward and put school resource officers in place. That was part of the agreement that they would go to civilian dispatches. So that's why that number jumped so much. Back to civilian dispatches, we have two school resource officers. There used to be a policeman on duty at the desk.
But the question is the overtime excessive, the $200,000 on the police department?
Me personally, I think the overtime is high, but that's...
Is there any...
The question you asked was, is the dispatches related to the overtime? They're not.
Okay.
Not,
so then the question is, why is the overtime so high on the police department?
Because we have certain manning hours that we need to follow. Certain manning requirements that need to be followed.
So there's no plan to reduce the overtime? There's no plan to try to reduce that overtime?
Well, there is. It's just, it's not an easy task to provide public safety and meet the manning requirements.
Okay. I'll go to the next item, page 10 of 13, streetlights. I know we went to LED on a lot of the streetlights, and I know it's come down from 200, 300,000. Now we're in the range of 110,000. Is there any more lowering of that budget for lighting? Are we complete on the LED for the streetlights, or are there going to be more savings on streetlights? I don't know. I don't know what's happening.
I'd have to look either at the budget committee or the I don't have an answer for that. I just know that the number's going from 293,000 to 110,000. So obviously that program that we got into with the LED lighting has really reaped their benefits, I believe. Someone has an answer to it.
The number that is in the budget from the department and my office is reflective of the reduction that we've seen, and it is our best estimate for what we expect to see this year. I think the next thing that will impact that is the probability at this point that the state will be taking responsibility for light fixtures, powering and maintaining light fixtures on state highways. That is in discussion at present. That would be the next major change that I would expect in that budget. But for now, this is our best estimate of the coming year based on what we've seen over the last year.
All right, so I guess there's no more savings left that we think out of the streetlight program for the now until the state takes over.
If the state does that.
Okay. So go to page 11 to 13, if you look at the debt service principal at the top, the bonding, I think it would help when you look at these bonds, we have no idea of the expiration date of the bonds. I know when Jason Pomerly was here, he refinanced 2 of the bonds, which I think extended the term and it lowered the rate. But when you look at this bond description, I guess we have no idea, the average taxpayer has no idea when these bonds are going to expire so that we don't have to worry about paying for them again. So maybe some way for the next iteration next week, it'd be nice if we could put the expiration of the bonds on those bond categories. It would help to understand how long we have to pay for the bonds. For example, when I was on the budget committee, the last bond item, 7.7 million, that was floated on a 10-year cycle because of the revenue windfall from National Grid. We knew it was going to be windfall, and we said, let's apportion it the future 10 years, let's use a shorter period, and use that windfall to pay off that 10-year bond. We didn't go to a 20-year bond. So that 7.7 million bond issue was supposed to be for roads, Kendall Dean, Bushy, and the elementary school. It was supposed to be. It was supposed to be 12 million.
7.7 was only for the roads and Kendall.
But it was intended for 12 million, but the school department didn't get their right application in time, so we had to remove the school from the 12. The balance is the 7.7, which is Kendall Dean, Bushy, and the 2 million for roads. So that we had to take the leftover piece, but we were smart enough to use a 10-year bond so that it would match National Grid's depreciation schedule. So to say that prior administration didn't do anything with the windfall, that's incorrect. The budget committee did plan to use that windfall to help the town with capital expenditures on these bonds. So they did the right thing a couple of years ago to use that windfall.
Just so we're clear on this, you and I will differ on this forever. The thought of using National Grid tangible tax money to pay a bond over a 10-year period, understand that National Grid, and we'll use a round number, put $6 million of new revenue into the tangible tax base. Tangible taxes are a depreciating value. 80% of that $6 million is going to vanish into thin air over time.
70%.
80%.
70.
It ends at 20%, but
30.
it's 20%.
I looked at the tax law. It's 30% left over. You only can depreciate 70%. That's true for fixtures, National Grid. Everybody follows the same 30% piece that you don't depreciate. You're allowed to depreciate 70%. National Grid, it's 5% a year. Walmart and Lowe's, furniture and fixtures, you're allowed to depreciate 10% a year, but it all goes down to 30% you don't touch. So the worst case we're going to...
We'll disagree then on the number. I believe it's 80%. Even if it's 70%, 70% of that number is going to vanish into thin air. But we're saying we're going to pay a bond with that. Those are the mistakes that we made going forward.
That's not a mistake.
It is a mistake. See, you and I will
mistake.
disagree. I'm not going to belabor the point. But we took money that's vanishing as we speak. It's going away. It's vanishing. It's in the thin air because of depreciation, and we based it on a 10-year payment. We took $6 million, which the next year we lost 15%. The next year we're losing 15%. This thing is decreasing in value every year, but our bond payment isn't decreasing in value.
Yeah,
and the only way to backfill that is on the taxpayers' back, the residential homeowners. And the town was cautioned about this in 2013, that they were building a house of cards on quicksand because they had a revenue problem. The revenue problem is we based all of our new revenue on a tangible tax, which is a depreciating, vanishing number. It's creating a structural deficit in your budget every year that you go forward. And the only way to fill it in is on the residential homeowners, or to get new commercial base or new tangible base to fill that in. That's the road we've been going down. I thought we would be in this budget predicament sooner than we are.
But I disagree with you.
I know
the reason I
we
disagree,
disagree.
it's not quicksand. You're going to end up with a Kendall Dean building that's renovated, a Bushy school that's renovated, and over $2 million of road repair. So it's not quicksand. You've got something for that National Grid revenue.
I'm not saying you didn't get anything for the revenue. The
That's what
revenue
you're telling me.
stream, the revenue stream to pay it is vanishing. We got a value for something that the money that we're spending is going away. And the only way to backfill that is on the residents' back. That's the issue that we're facing. You created a structural deficit by using depreciating money to pay off a fixed asset. Does that make sense?
No.
Of course it doesn't make
No, it
sense.
doesn't, because you
that's
know
what we
why?
did.
Because at the time, the money would have had to go back to the taxpayer.
No,
So
you could have done different things with that money. You could have
couldn't have.
allocated it differently. You could have.
we were told the only way to use that money properly was to float a bond, to stay within the cap of the General Assembly.
There were other ways you could have utilized that money by isolating it into a fund. There were other things you could have done. It still would have gone into the tax, into the base, but not into
But
the
I
levy.
disagree, so let me move on. I disagree.
But
I
that's
disagree
the
with your
issue, that
comments.
you're saying that National Grid was paying these things, but the reality of it is that the depreciating
It's not a
value.
reality, you got something for it, and it was used wisely. It wasn't wasted. So let me move on to the
I didn't
next
say it was
item.
wasted. I said it's a depreciating
You're
value.
calling
which
it
is
quicksand.
creating
You're
structural
calling
deficit.
it quicksand, and we didn't do our job. So let me move on to the next item. I go to page 12 of 13. You look at the state aid reduction. Now, comments are made that students are going to charter schools. It's right in the middle, state aid, the $368,000 reduction from state aid. As we reduce the enrollment in the schools, we're going to get less state aid. The question is, do we have an offset as you reduce, you get less students and you get less state aid? Are we making adjustments into the head count of our teachers and administrative staff to make that offset? So if you're losing 20 or 30 or 40 students a year, your enrollment's going down, are we managing the head count of our staff? I don't know. You can't have it both ways. If you don't adjust your staff head count and you lose students and you get less state aid, your budget's going to go up. So maybe during the discussion we can get more information about what offsets are being taken as we're reducing the student population in North Smithfield. So it's just a question. All right, so if you go to the Appendix D, which is the capital, I did mention the Cherry Brook flood study, 14,000. It's good. I don't know if any of the residents have any comment from Cherry Brook in the audience, and let them add their 2 cents. But it's surprising that I saw this item. It was kind of a big surprise. I like it. I mean, it's something that we should have done 10 years ago. So now it's back on the books. But I don't know what generated this. Was from the town planner? Or, I mean, what generated this Cherry Brook study? The request for it.
Me.
Okay. No, I
I've seen
think,
enough of the flooding in Cherry Brook by Great Road, watched it in multiple storms, and realized that this isn't going away. It continues to get worse. 100 years ago, farmers could put their tractors in the stream and muck out the silt. Can't do that anymore. So the floodplain continues to rise. The base of the floodplain continues to rise with every grain of sand that runs downhill. And the water that needs to, tries to occupy that same space continues to spread out. And I'm not going to sit and wait until it gets to the point that it's in the living rooms of the houses along that point in Cherry Brook. We need to study it and pursue grant funding if possible to be able to resolve the issue in the long run.
so it goes back to my initial comment. It's important to keep Cedar Swamp, increase the water holding capacity, because the more water that you can hold in that swamp, the less flooding you're going to get in Cherry Brook.
Now, the problem there is because there's an upstream to Cedar Swamp, just like there's a downstream to Cedar Swamp. I can agree that we can't be doing work without permits and approval from DEM, but these two things are not in opposition to one another.
I'd like to finish with just the comments that Mr. Ezovski made at the beginning about the tax rate. I know you want to be fair to everyone, But with decreasing tangibles, it makes no sense at this point in the game to try to keep reducing the tax rate on tangibles. The problem we have is because of the ratio, if you go to Rhode Island General Law 44-5-20.20, that's where we agreed to set the rate structure according to the General Assembly, that the ratio of tangibles to commercial cannot exceed 2.25, and the commercial to residential cannot exceed 1.5. We have plenty of space between commercial and residential. The problem is the ratio from tangible to commercial. If you touch that commercial rate by 1 penny, you're going to have to lower the tangible rate by 2.25 cents. So you can see it in the newspaper ad. The rate went down for $1 on commercial, and the tangible had to go down to $2.22. So you're going to cause some really issues with revenue if you do try to change that commercial too high. You can change it by a couple pennies, and you can change the tangibles by pennies, but if you start changing the commercial by $1, you're going to really make a big change in the tangible rate, and it's going to come out of the residential. I don't know what the audience would like to say. Would they prefer that they get a lower residential rate, that we're very careful on lowering the commercial rate? But that's something that you're going to talk about at the next meeting, but the public can't talk about it, so if anyone in the audience wants to talk about their tax rates, their residential tax rates, and they would prefer to see the residential rate get a bigger decrease than commercial, then I welcome you to step up tonight and talk about your tax rate. Thank you for listening.
Mike Clifford, 489 Black Plain Road. I've listened to you, Paul, from time to time, continually repeat the same old saying, they should have never floated the bond for the renovation projects when they did. They should
That's
have,
not what I said.
No, that's what you
That's
said.
not what I said.
Don't interrupt me, I won't interrupt you, okay? I've also read statements posted on the Valley Breeze by the administrator that the previous leadership lacked the foresight to put the windfall money aside from National Grid. When I read that statement, I laughed. And when I hear you make your comments about we shouldn't have floated the bond at the time that we did, I also laugh. Just for your own information, we had meetings with, and it shows me too that I don't even think you've ever read or understand the tax levy law, because there's 4 exemptions to exceeding the cap in the tax levy law. And there isn't an exemption in the tax levy law to exceed the cap so that you can put money in a piggy bank on the side. Okay, it doesn't exist. When this situation faced the budget committee, we actually met in a group with the town administrator, the finance director, and different individuals, including the bond council person and people from, we had phone conferences with people from the Office of Municipal Affairs. Just to make sure that my recollection was correct, I called Rudy Falcione from the Office of Municipal Affairs this afternoon to verify that my understanding was correct, that we didn't misread a message when we met with him, and that we did the right thing by floating the bond. You continue, so you show me where the exemption in the levy law allows you to just take a pile of money that you got in a windfall thing and put it aside for future somethings, because it doesn't exist. It's not in the levy law. The levy law requires that if you don't meet one of those 4 exemptions to use the money in some way, you have to give it back to the taxpayers as a reduction in their tax rate. So we did use one of the exemptions. We put out the bond, and in that year that we floated that bond, the bulk of most of, just about all of the National Grid money was used to pay for that bond. You talk about a diminishing return, and we're losing value in that, so we're going to be on the hook over the 10-year period. Why don't you take the time, I know they've been archived, but there were presentations by my budget committee and by Mrs. Faracy's budget committee on the topic of the tangibles and the bond issues over and over and over. We had public presentations. I think I had to have at least 2 as the chair of the budget committee, and I think Mrs. Faracy had 2 when she chaired the budget committee. Those presentations were on the town website. I looked for them today and couldn't find them. One was there, I believe, but everything prior to 2016 seems to be archived into oblivion. But if you looked at one of those presentations, and I remember we did the presentation at Scouter's Hall, and it was the evening that the 2 the first time that the two school committee appointees were going to be appointed, so there was a large crowd of school people there, so they got to see the presentation. But when we did that presentation, we had a flow chart showing the declining revenue from National Grid, the windfall that you referred to, and how it paralleled and matched the bond payments. So we extrapolated it out over different scenarios. One was 10-year more amortization of the bond, and one was a 15. And although that revenue diminishes, it still covered, Paul, the bond payment and interest for, I believe, and I have to go by my memory here because our presentation seemed to have been wiped from the face of this earth for 7 years of the 10. Okay? So you don't know what you're talking about, and you obviously have never read the reports or seen the PowerPoint presentations that were on the town website. I defy you to show me in the tax levy law where we could just take that little bundle of money, like everybody's saying we were so stupid not to do, and put it in a piggy bank for future use. It doesn't exist. So stop with the propaganda. Get on the phone and call the Municipal Affairs Office, the Financial Affairs Office of the state. Verify what you're saying before you blot it out there. Okay, so I'm tired of hearing this is a problem of previous leadership and other budget committees. Mrs. Farrisee did a wonderful job, and I'm going to pat myself on the back. Okay, we had an awful situation. We had a superintendent that wouldn't cooperate. We had to compile our own 3-year history of line item expenditures. All he gave us was 2,700 journal entries in a hard copy, and we took literally 1,000 hours among us to compile an Excel sheet to show that 3-year history. And with that tool, we were able to pick that budget apart to the point that in the last budget proposal that I gave, we recommended zero increase in the tax, in the appropriation at the local level from the school department to the school department, because we